hello everyone, and welcome. I think most of you know me, some of you may not. So for the benefit of those that do not, my name is Homero Escandon. I am president of the ASCM San Diego chapter. And on behalf of the board of directors, our instructors, our membership, and our entire network and our partner network, welcome. This is an exciting thing. It's an exciting topic. I think for me, it is very, very important and appropriate. It is an existential topic. And this is what we're starting here. And, it takes a spark, right? What we're starting here is the benefit will go for generations, right? And I think that's really the purpose behind what we're doing here. We're not doing it necessarily for ourselves. We're doing it for the future. And I think that makes it very, very important for us. So very, very excited to kick this off. And we've got some folks giving you a bit of information at the start here, and then we're going to get into kind of breakout rooms and little focus groups. Today is really about kind of kicking off and looking to the future, and all of you playing your part, adding your unique contribution to this effort. So thank you and welcome, and I'll kind of hand it back over to the other folks here.
Okay, thank you, Homero. Anyway, let's go roll through this, and as I said, let people catch up. Maybe when they get into a breakout room, the facilitator could tell them what they missed. Being on time is important. So time is money. At any rate, what I wanted to share with everyone is that Peter brought this up to me today. And I went through this transition very much earlier. That is, I coined the phrase for myself, eco-sustainability, because people often use sustainability in the old context, and it confused people when it was used in the new context. The old context was, my company is sustainable because we have money, our cash flow is okay, our balance sheet's okay. As Bert pointed out, that was probably a lie anyway, because they didn't know how to account for pollution, which is one of the root causes of climate change. And also, if we look at the green movement, people associated green with sustainable, eco-sustainable, and that's kind of worn its welcome out. People are tired of it. It doesn't generate interest. So I just coined the phrase eco-sustainability, and Peter looked for it and he found one definition. And there's the definition in front of you. And it said, we have to add green systems to the existing business systems before things will work well. And that would bring into play the GHG protocol, water footprint network, hook it up with other methods of planning, for example, SCORE. And we'll get into that. We also made another discovery in a meeting that we felt that many people in our membership, at least, who should know about SCORE, don't know a lot about SCORE. And if you look to the outside world, that's even a greater disparity. In fact, I believe that as had been SCORE widely adopted, we wouldn't have all the mess we have in supply chains today with COVID-19. That would be greatly minimized. Anyway, just wanted to share that recent discovery thanks to Peter. And Peter will join us shortly, I hope. Goals for the meeting, this is what I wanted to share with those who are not part of our core group, was we wanted to communicate the scope of our program, the planned program, but it is in draft form, and we want to get input to see what needs to be modified. And we want to understand the reasons why we omitted something, or the reasons why we're emphasizing something where it may not have value, but we think we're okay, but you don't know, I don't know what I don't know, and that applies to everybody. The other part is we wanted to learn about the current levels of economic sustainability knowledge that individuals had collectively. How knowledgeable are they? Or do they know about the GHG protocol? Do they know about the Carbon Disclosure Project? Do they know about the Water Footprint Network? What do they want or need to learn? That's the wants and the needs are very much different. They may want something, but it may not be as valuable as what they need to learn. But we want to at least understand where they're coming from and understand the current eco-sustainability status of their corporation. What do they have going? For example, one of the people on our task force, Warren, he works for a company, Hunter, that is very involved. In fact, he is the ESG guy at that corporation. So they're well on their way, but there are others where maybe they're not so far advanced, and there are others that are very advanced. And in fact, it's nice to know which two groups they belong in, because one desperately needs help and the other one could be a source of help to us in kind of evangelizing a new way of looking at supply chain. Not a new way, but a more focused way. And then how do we get to the sea level? Any thoughts about how to do that? How do we get to the top? I mean, I'd rather talk to a CEO than talk to a planner, even though I respect what the planner does. But the CEO has the authority to push down requirements and set metrics that measure progress to target goals. And who wants to join our task force? We probably could use 2-3 more capable individuals who are willing to take on a bit of work and help us put this thing together and make it run, because it's going to be quite a good calendar's worth, a good year and a half's worth of programming at a monthly level, if not one topic covered per month, and some months 2 or even 3. So that was the goals of the meeting, the reason why we set it up. But I'd like to put into context where in eco-sustainability, where we really want to start. And it's really not at the beginning in 1973 or 74 in Stockholm, but it began in the year 2000. And just about that time, there was a phrase people like to use talking about the green economy. And that was people, planet, and profit. And everybody jumped all on that. And it really was quite catchy. And just after that, something very significant happened. And that's our pickup point for discussion. We can forget about all this stuff up here from, excuse me, it's 72 all the way to about 99. But the real action started in 2000 with the UN Global Compact and the 10 principles. Up until that point, nations were just trying to figure out how they could avoid making tough decisions about coping with climate change and carbon emissions and how to reduce them. And occasionally they even mention water, but wasting almost 30 years trying to get 200 plus nations to come to some sort of agreement was a very difficult task. But 2000 was the year, and that spawned a whole series of things. And I guess the most important, at least, was the GHG protocol, which deals with carbon. I don't know if you ever had an opportunity to download their PDF files that go through at a high level all the principles that they've used. And it really is based on accounting approaches, accounting methodologies. And so it's familiar. And we have one person in our attendance here is going to be one of our experts speaking in the future. Bert, you know, maybe if you're in a breakout room with him, you might ask him about, you know, what's been going on during the last 30 years, because he's been involved. But that spawned a whole lot of things. There was an organization called the Carbon Disclosure Project formed to house the reports that our companies made, corporations made on their plans for emissions reduction. And then we had ISO starting to get involved in the environmental standards. And then in 2006 and 7, ISO 1464 was written. And that was a collaboration between the GHG protocol and ISO, which legitimized the GHG protocol. And then water came into the picture in 2007, again through the UN Global Compact, and was called the CEO Water Mandate. And then a methodology, quite elegant methodology on water called the Water Footprint Network evolved. And then, right after that, Scope 3, which dealt with supply chain, was put in place, released. Up until that point, the GHG protocol only considered its span of influence to be the things that a corporation had either operational or financial control of, meaning their sites, their things they owned. But starting with Scope 3, it was the supply chain upstream and also the downstream value part of the value chain, meaning the life cycle of the product. So we're really only picking up from the year 2000 until current. And one of the missions I made in putting this slide together is from a very early time, I understood the value of SCORE. And as I mentioned earlier, in a meeting of the task force, that we felt that our membership did not fully understand what SCORE was all about, despite it being the IP property of ASCM. It was designed by the Supply Chain Council, and Apex absorbed it, and in fact reconfigured it, retitled itself to ASCM because of it. So SCORE will be really an integral part of this next year, and it's a platform, because two of the most important methodologies are very accommodating to SCORE, meaning they all fit together. And I'll get into that in a few minutes. But SCORE, and there'll be a more extensive one, and I hope that Peter's able to show up because he has a really nice presentation.
I'm here.
Okay. Peter has a great presentation, and he's the expert. I'm just the guy that was exposed to it as a courtesy to me in a workshop about 9 or 10 years ago. But the SCORE framework really is very consistent. It has 5 different aspects to it. It is planning, and it understands the style of manufacturing. It has the sort, make, deliver, and return. And you know, bear in mind, this was designed in 1995. So they also were thinking about the circular economy at that point. But it has 5 integrated processes that I just mentioned. And it cascades down to 4 additional levels of progressively more detail. And what's contained in those other levels is metrics. So someone can really look at where they fit. There's best practices, which would come, for example, from the Apex OMBOK, from CPIM, all the body of knowledge encompassed in CPIM, which is really an extract of OMBOK, and also CSEP, and then benchmarking. And what amazed me at the time is they have the ability to benchmark people. And if I understand it correctly, a supplier could even be benchmarked without them even knowing about it. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. But the plan was to take this same framework and ask their key suppliers to go through the same process. And again, Peter will come up with a more elegant explanation. And then in turn, that supplier will also ask their suppliers to do it. So we get clarity, we get an understanding, a true understanding of what assets and liabilities a supplier brings to the corporation, to the supply chain master. And I'm not sure that's a word still used today, but Peter can update us in a minute. And then one of the things I really liked, being a visual spatial learner, is that it's a visual representation of a holistic integrated global network. And it shares this with the water footprint network that I'll describe in a minute shortly. But this really is the foundation for any effort that really takes into account that slogan of the late 1990s of people, planet, and profit. It brings those all together. But again, SCORE is the platform. Here's their visualization. I didn't keep my courseware book at the time. It wasn't electronic. They give you a gigantic book. And but this is from the Water Footprint Network, which also looks at that, because in that methodology, the source of water that's embedded in a product that eventually you use is important to them, because in many parts of the world, we're actually devastating economies because of overutilizing their water sources and preserving ours. But at any rate, I move on to why SCORE really makes sense as a foundation, in that I'll look under purpose and the result part of it. It's a supply chain discovery process. Again, Peter has a more elegant understanding of it because he's implemented it. I haven't. But you discover things about yourself, and you discover things about your suppliers that are eye-openers. It allows for benchmarking. So it's helping with efficiency, supply chain efficiency. You gain better visibility. And it also is really important in risk management. And that's critical today, as we could see that a lot of poor judgment was made on suppliers, and supply chains have collapsed during the COVID-19 epidemic or pandemic. But the key point is, all these results are not necessarily all of them, but the sixth one is the one that is important to me. That is, it's a foundation for eco-sustainability planning. Because again, there's two synergistic other methodologies out there. And one of them is the protocol itself. And the thing that I like about the protocol most is it says that you inherit the carbon that's delivered from your supplier. And they had already inherited the carbon. So that it's accumulating carbon from upstream all the way down to the eventual buyer of the product. So there's a ledger there where someone cannot outsource everything and have a small carbon footprint, and then their supply chain has a bigger carbon footprint. And 80% right now of the carbon, total carbon in a product is estimated to occur in the supply chain. And these are all the things that it deals with: end-to-end carbon accounting, corporate reduction, carbon reduction planning, supply chain excellence. Because when you eliminate carbon, it's an opportunity to rethink the way you do things. And therefore you can come up with better ways of doing things, and also product life cycle planning. And I'm not sure that all these things I've put in the result column are appropriate. There could be even more. But the final methodology is the water footprint network, which right now has kind of stagnated, but it was a full methodology, but I'm sure it's being embedded in planning products somewhere. But I'm in contact with them. The founder, Hoekstra, died, and it's actually a university in the Netherlands. But it gets into end-to-end water usage accounting. They use the concept of virtual or embedded water, corporate reduction planning, supply chain collaboration, and product lifecycle planning. So they're all into that. Anybody seen my earlier presentations? The amount of water used to make a class of beer is tremendous. A hamburger is mind-boggling, all the water. And also when you learn that a country like the UK imports more water in the products that they consume than the water that they have locally. So here's a place that is really wet, and they're consuming water from dry places where they have ample water. So there is the synergy, and why SCORE is appropriate as a foundation for any attack on emission reduction and frugal use of water. Now I'd like to turn it over to Peter. And Peter, the way we set it up, if you tell me to change a slide, just say change a slide and I'll click it. Okay?
Oh, great. Well, thank you, Preston, and appreciate everybody making the time tonight. It was wonderful to hear from Preston, and first time in a long time, a few months ago, and just because we had shared a great time on the APICS and now ASC on board a number of years ago, back when we had the challenges of 2008, 2009, 2010, which in some ways seem quaint given today's challenges, but everything has a solution, as it did back then, and as we're getting through things today. And I really have a passion for doing this work. And as Preston said, I've actually done it on a large scale, and I have lived this for a long time. So what I want to talk about today was just trying to connect some of the dots of what you guys are thinking about, and bring together some elements of sustainability and how that relates to the circular economy and value, and all the way back through why SCORE is a good way to work through that. I was trying to think back. The last time I was in San Diego was 2008 for a SCORE conference. It's actually with the Supply Chain Council. I do get back and forth to California. I actually work for a California company up in Valencia, even though I'm based on the East Coast. So I do have a connection to the West Coast. So I have, as Preston said, I've got a lot of ties to SCORE. I've been involved in SCORE for, I was trying to figure it out, 18 years. I'm a SCORE master instructor, and I'm SCORE certified and all that good stuff. And I've, the more important thing is I put it to actual practical use. A lot of that was with DuPont. We transformed one of the world's most successful materials management or materials science companies into one that was really based around sustainability for the future, and actually generated a lot of value in doing that. So all the stuff that I talk about really does work at all different scales. So from smaller organizations all the way up to global corporations. So a little bit about me. So I've been 30 plus years in supply chain business development related career. I'm back in aerospace after 25 years. I started out in aerospace and then sort of followed the emerging practice of supply chain through a lot of different industries. Ended up for a long period of time with DuPont and with Dow Chemical, and then back again in aerospace. And then been an APICS member, certified, I think, since for about 28 years. It seems like a long time now. Sustainability has really been a lifelong experience for me. It's sort of a lived experience. I grew up in Vermont and some islands off the northwest coast of Washington State. And, you know, on the islands where we lived, like we initially didn't have running water or plumbing or anything like that. So you lived in a very different way. I don't know if I'm trying to remember if we had electricity. No, we didn't have electricity either. I think about it in the beginning. So, you know, so you learn to get by. In Vermont, we heated with wood, which was a very common thing everybody did. My father had solar hot water heat, and I had a lot of cold showers on cloudy days. But you know, I've lived this stuff all my life. So when I started to do it professionally, it made a lot of intuitive sense. It wasn't like a big leap to understand some of these things. And I'm going to try to relate some of that as I talk tonight. I am also involved in some other stuff. I get involved in some things around biochemistry and some initiatives around trying to develop some industry around that. That goes back to some work that I did in DuPont, and you know, some of the things we're trying to grow sort of outside of that. I've done a lot of work on supply chains. It's sort of what I do in aerospace. A lot of it's related to working with customers, and I've been involved in SCORE. SCORE is now, I think it's version 12 with ASCM. And one of the things SCORE is trying to do is the SCORE body now is trying to articulate what the circular economy would look like sort of in a SCORE context. So that's a little graphic in the upper right. And a lot of the stuff that I've been involved in is been about really optimizing. In the middle there is Industry 3.0 for companies. That's really what a lot of supply chain management's been about. And then I'm sure you're all familiar with the term Industry 4.0, which is really trying to bring together the digitalization of things, mass amounts of data. And you could even apply the circular economy to that as well, because you've got a lot more information and can do a lot of things, and it's a much more connected world. So a lot of the things I do, you know, ultimately kind of end up in that space. So you can go to the next one, Preston. So just to kind of present sort of a couple simple ideas about this, you know, a common term now is circular economy. It's really, if you think about it, it's a series of supply chain ecosystems with a focus on lower waste, lower energy, and lower water intensity, and really a virtuous cycle. So it's trying to make things better with less. I mean, it's really what you're trying to do. And it takes into account a lot of the practices that have been really developed to a world-class level in the last, I don't know, 30, 40 years almost. And we'll talk a little bit about some of that. So on the left is a simple model of a supply chain, right? You take in raw materials, and raw materials, you know, could be somebody else's finished goods, but you do some kind of process, you end up with finished goods. And then a big element in a SCORE, you know, points out there's a return cycle, and that's been embedded in the model for a very long time, is you may reclaim some of that work in process even before it leaves the door, rework it. It could be broken down and it could be recycled. And then it goes back into the process. You could do the same thing with taking return goods back. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the car company Subaru. Does anybody have a Subaru?
Yep.
Okay, so got Subaru. So Subaru has been a zero waste manufacturer in the United States for 30 years. Now, Subaru did that for a couple of reasons. One, because like a lot of Japanese companies, Subaru had already adopted, you know, some elements of lean manufacturing, which Toyota pioneered. They've always had a tie to Toyota, but they also didn't make a lot of money when they first came to the United States. So trying to minimize waste was actually, you know, a function of how they survived initially. And today it's really about how they do business. And, you know, it's something that works. So it's been a very practical way of doing things for a long time for companies that value it, right? So it's what you focus on is what you get. So if you think more on the right of the circular economy, a different way of thinking is you start with the thought that, all right, I want to have the ability to reclaim and reuse things. And I want to minimize the intensity of the resources that I use just to the level that produces the value I'm trying to do. And so starting with that kind of thought is kind of the new piece. We didn't always think that way. So that goes into the design phase. It goes into the actual production process. I mentioned Subaru has really optimized that zero waste approach to manufacturing. Everything has a reuse, right? Distribution is a massive use of resources. You think about the increases in distribution under COVID and the amount of, you know, impact on the environment of doing that. So you're driving vehicles everywhere now. So people are not just driving to stores and picking up a number of things by going to a number of different stores. Everything is arriving at their home, and it could be as small as a single tiny package to a series of boxes. So that's actually kind of reverse some things. But if you look at some of the leading companies in distribution like Amazon, they're working to electrify their whole fleet. Now, Amazon doesn't do stuff because it's a nice idea. Amazon does it because there's a bottom line impact. And so by electrifying it, there's a lot of benefits they gain from that, but ultimately it flows to the bottom line. And then consumption, whether you're an end user or a consumer, ultimate consumer of anything, we process that, we produce waste, it goes somewhere. But, a lot of the thinking that goes into that now is, how do I reduce packaging? Here in the state of Delaware, they don't have bags anymore. So you have to you either get a paper bag and they're reluctant to give you one, you buy a bag or you bring a recyclable bag, but otherwise you carry stuff out in your arms. And it's a different experience. It's been a bit of a transition in the last year, but people are used to it. And you're taking a huge amount of waste out of the environment, out of the waste cycle, out of having to pick up that refuge. And people are applying the same thing to packaging. And then you go into reuse and repair. It was great to see the executive order that President Biden signed about right to repair, because a lot of things weren't allowed to repair. There was ultimately more of a revenue model for some people like Apple or John Deere. They were the only ones that could touch and open up anything. Well, that's been opened up, but it's that same concept that you're doing things so they can be worked on, reused, updated. And that's part of the original design. So that's really what a circular economy is about. And part of that whole cycle is you're going to have some residual waste, but hopefully you have less of it and you have a way to process that waste that you have thought of from the beginning. And that's really what, a circular economy is all about. It's just a series of connected supply chains with some different goals than we have today. But again, still look at the bottom line. Any questions on that so far?
I think you got it.
The next one.
Peter, this is Daniel Lin. By the way, I'm a professor at USD. This is great. I enjoy your presentation. One question, actually. So circular economy is a very great idea, and you gave this example of a Subaru. One of the challenges that I find is from companies. I used to work on, my research used to be on e-waste, for example. And one of the challenges is really how to get those waste collection in some way first, how to get them out of consumers' hands. Secondly, for example, when e-waste are collected, it's very hard to, it's a lot of work to disassemble them, sort them, so that they can eventually be reused as a form of raw material. So my question is, do you have any other examples how companies can successfully drive this circular economy? Is it something that is a little bit more like privilege of big companies like Subaru, who has more resource to really push it on? But because, as you can imagine, it probably needs a lot of effort to collect and sort and process those used product back to raw material in a economic manner. Just curious.
No, it actually goes back down to design intent. One of the reasons e-waste is so difficult to process is that it was never designed to be broken back down again. So you have a lot of things that are, molded together, very difficult to separate. You have some heavy metals that are difficult to process out, even though they're valuable. So, they're just beginning to try to rethink that and try to design things in a way that are more recyclable. So if you take a look at, some of the better phones out there like Apple or Samsung, they're using real metals in the case or glass or things that, create a very, nice experience for the user, but also can be taken back apart again and reused. So, there's ways to, but I'll give you a different example from my own life. So one of the things that I'm pursuing, and I hope to do it, through the end of my life, is to build sustainable communities. Here in Delaware, it's not a high income state, and, sort of sustainable living is something people are interested in, but it's generally something you have to be fairly well off to afford to do. So we're working on some initiatives with the county here to try to develop, to start with, is more sustainable housing, smaller, more minimal housing, and then to build out some other industries that are related to that. But and we're starting very small. And one of the things we're doing is we're through a lot of, different trial and error and things, we've decided to use containers as the basic structural element of homes. And it's the lowest cost. It's using a recyclable material. Delaware has already a very sizable port. It's the largest fruit port in North America. And then we're getting a second port, which will be another large port that's coming in over the next 5 to 10 years. So we'll have a ready source of that material. Everything we've designed into these units, we've designed for minimum energy use, sort of maximum health for the occupants. And everything about it is designed to be torn apart again. So part of the design that we've experimented with is we can take these containers back, strip them out, refinish them, and refit them for something else very quickly. And everything is designed for both a good life cycle and minimal, intensity of resources, but also for reuse. So you can apply this literally to anything. It's just a matter of changing your thinking around and experimenting a little bit with some of these things. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Good.
And go to the next one. So I like to think in analogs. I mean, this is something when I was first trying to market sustainable supply chains for DuPont. So for DuPont, we aren't always in the end use of, or people don't picture us in the end use. So we're using material that goes into something. And so as we started to talk about sustainable supply chains, we believe that we could outcompete other companies by having a more sustainable supply chain that went into the product. So you had to be able to prove that to our customers and to the end user in some way. And so I had spent a lot of time trying to get interest up through APIX and other organizations externally, sort of get some feedback and brought in some of the processes we were trying to experiment with. And so talking in terms that made sense to people in a practical way, tended to work better than saying, isn't this a wonderful thing? And we should all do this because it's a good idea. And so one way to think about it is biomaterials, which I've spent a lot of time on, are really a direct conversion of plants to products instead of waiting for fossil fuels, right? Instead of hanging around waiting for fossil fuels to be processed so you can get plastic and do the same thing, you're just bypassing those processes to get similar polymers and other things. Solar energy, all that really is electricity minus the long wait for coal, oil, and gas, and all the processes that happen in earth science to get you there, right? So it's just, that's all it is. It really takes the mystery out of it. And then if you think more in terms of sustainability as a business concept, and if you think about the role of ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance, which you guys will hear a little bit more about from more of an expert later, it's really about business accountability through the boards, right? Who in turn hold leadership, the executive leadership accountable, and also they as a group are accountable to outside investors and other stakeholders. So if you kind of take those two things, one is business governance, how it's run, how it's interacting with stakeholders. The other is sustainability from a business value standpoint, and you apply it to the little model I have in the bottom. So, people are concerned about what goes into their food, how animals are treated in the production of proteins. And companies on the other hand want to sell products like that, but they still need to make money doing it. McDonald's is after 2 years, almost 3 years after Burger King, just introducing a pilot project on plant-based burgers. And that was a combination of trying to come up with taste, but also to make money doing it. I don't know that Burger King is making a lot of money doing what they're doing. So, these things are business decisions that take a while to do. So let's, think about better, our customers want, better quality food, and they want, nicer treatment of animals, and they want less impact on the environment, right? So that's really an ESG kind of issue. It's really a strategy that the board has got to approve and provide governance to the executive team to do. Those are kind of big things. So if you think about it in terms of what Preston talked about before, which is, people, planet, and profit, and trying to make those things work together is, one of the things you have to look at it is reduced antibiotic use. That has a trade-off, right? Antibiotics, certainly beef cattle, can be used to accelerate the growth of the animal, and certainly the growth of certain elements that are valuable in breaking the animal down into viable products. But antibiotics are expensive. They're also expensive in terms of human health and animal health. People want safe and affordable food. They want both. And that sometimes in the past has been a trade-off. It doesn't have to be. And then the environment certainly is impacted by intense feedlot, support of animals in California. It's a big agriculture region, but it's intense feedlot agriculture in some cases when you're dealing with animals. And certainly employment, everyone wants, good jobs. One of the big things about farming in America is it's done by very few people, but we produce more and more food. So, the economy around employment in a lot of places, I did a lot of work in Iowa for DuPont. We had Pioneer Seed, and it's really amazing to see these hollowed out farm towns and abandoned homes because there just aren't that many jobs, yet the production is much greater than it's ever been for a lot of different reasons. So, part of this is to say, how do you re-inject, jobs back into this whole thing? And so you can get those combinations to work, and it's a combination, it's partly taking the principle of sustainability and applying them for less intensity of whatever you're doing to get the same output or a better output. And the other one is having the governance at the stakeholder level there to help guide and hold the organization accountable in doing that. So that's just some simple examples of trying to think through some of this stuff. Anybody have any questions or other thoughts here? Preston, want to go to the next slide? So let's bring it back to SCORE. So SCORE, Preston did a great job introducing it. The real value of SCORE is it's a way to take complexity and simplify it. And then to take that simplified complexity and move from a current state of performance to a better future state of performance. And so it's a brilliant sort of building block approach to doing these things. And once you kind of understand SCORE, it follows a certain logic, and it makes it very, very accessible to, again, understand supply chains, to understand the differences between supply chains, and then make improvements that are sustainable in terms of performance. So there's some basic elements of the SCORE model that are important to understand. And SCORE is a subject that usually takes about almost 2 weeks to get through if you do the courses right. But just sort of some quick insight, a core element of SCORE that was designed into it from the very beginning is it's about business process improvement. Notice I didn't say supply chain or operations or materials management. It's business process improvement. That's a core element that's baked in from the beginning. Is to capture that as is state in an understandable and structured way, and understand business activities. So you have to understand the business model you're in, right? So you want to be able to take those elements, understand how you're creating value, the process you have, map that activity, and then be able to articulate what a future state might look like using the same basic logic and architecture. And so that's really a focus on processes, which is a really important part of SCORE. SCORE does a great job of describing processes in a very standardized way. Another part that Preston had touched on was performance benchmarking. So again, a core element of SCORE from the very beginning was, in order to improve, you have to know whether your performance, how it sits against other things, either aspirationally or against competition or against yourself even. One of the things that we used to teach a lot in SCORE, and one of the things we applied a lot in DuPont when we used it, was look at the best performance you've ever done and say, how do I sustainably achieve that performance instead of a 1 or 2 times in the past? How do I sustainably achieve it? So internal benchmarking is a very valuable tool, sometimes much more valuable than external benchmarking. So you're trying to quantify the relative performance between similar supply chains, similar processes, and you want to establish internal targets that are going to drive the projects for improvement. And so that's really about a series of very straightforward metrics that you can aggregate and disaggregate along with processes. And the next part of it that's really important is best practice analysis. So SCORE does a lot of things to suggest, what best practices are, what poor practices are, what maybe some up and coming practices are. So I think the last iteration of SCORE we worked on, which was 12, which was the last one I participated in a few years ago, we said sustainability, green SCORE is a best practice. It's no longer kind of a future practice coming. It is literally a best practice. That is, at least conceptually, is embedded in SCORE today. And it's really about identifying the practices. Now, this talks about software solutions, and SCORE doesn't really do that. SCORE is more about articulating what you're trying to do, and it allows you to map to some things that are in certain software packages, so that the way that's stated isn't really super accurate. And how do you do all those things and apply those practices so you get the better performance you've identified with performance metrics against the processes you're working with? So that's the practice side of it. And the other piece that is really important to bring it all together is the people side of it, right? So if you don't have people engaged in this, if people understand it, if you're not working on the change management with the people side of it, none of that's going to certainly probably won't happen in the first place, and it certainly won't sustain. So SCORE has done a great job of identifying skills related to performance and process, and then skills related to practices. And then it's how you can use the SCORE architecture to align those to both not only the skills you need, but the staffing that you need, and how that's going to change against these, in terms of going from a current state to a future state. And so it's really about people skills as well. So then SCORE takes all those things in what's called a reference framework and gives you a way to relate one to another. So this is just a real simple explanation of what's in there. Like I said, SCORE takes a little while to understand, but that's the basis of it. Anybody have any thoughts or immediate questions on this? To me, it's a very underutilized part of ASCM. And some days I was the one that really pressed for the integration of the Supply Chain Council and APICS. And some days I regret it because SCORE was originally an open source design for supply chain improvement, and we encouraged that. And APICS, unfortunately, in their way of thinking, has sort of closed off that a little too much. And it's sort of, I think, limited the input you get in terms of driving SCORE. Some of the most successful companies in the world, SCORE is deeply embedded in their processes. SCORE is what's behind SAP. SCORE is used by all the leading consulting companies. They just won't tell you, because if they told you, you wouldn't pay the high prices you pay sometimes, but they all use it in the background. Leading companies, Dow, BASF, DuPont, all the leading material science companies all use it because it really, really helped revolutionize the way they manage our supply chains. About a decade ago, a lot of the pharma companies using it. Johnson & Johnson has been working on embedding SCORE for about the last 3 or 4 years. So, if you ever read job descriptions for a more senior supply chain role at Johnson & Johnson, you will see elements of SCORE in there. It's really interesting. You'll see the same thing with DuPont job postings. You'll see some elements of it in there. So that's how deeply it's embedded into the culture of some of these companies. So, a question?
Just to make a comment, isn't the military involved with the Navy?
They did. So they did for quite a long time. They got heavily involved in it. The Logistics Command was using it because it was a way for them to simplify the complexity of resupply. So they were heavily involved in a lot of the work with SCORE. They were part of the Supply Chain Council. And another part, actually, the government has used SCORE in a lot of different ways. So Green SCORE, which I haven't really touched on, but Green SCORE is, I sent Preston some information on that today, was actually a one-off design of SCORE that was done by a group called LMI, which is a captive government consulting agency. And when greenhouse gas emissions under the, I think, Bush 1 administration became a federal mandate, they had to figure out a way to do it. And so LMI figured out that SCORE was the right way to enable all federal agencies to track greenhouse gases and do something about it. So they built a model and they did all the internal consulting with the federal government to allow greenhouse gas tracking, which is why Green SCORE has a lot of elements of GHG tracking in it, because it was designed specifically for that. So it's been applied, at a big scale, not only in business, but also in government.
Can I make a comment?
Yep.
What I'm looking at here with your 4 techniques is very similar to total quality management.
It has
and
elements.
of course, you know that as well. And Preston and I talked earlier about the importance of linking this initiative with supply chain management to related organizational vectors, such as quality management and also accounting. And the International Federation of Accountants has in fact published a sustainability framework that has an entire chapter devoted to how accountants can help supply chain managers in their organizations achieve sustainability. And I think this is a great point that you're making here, that this all integrates to other organizational frameworks, including risk management, which is shooting up the awareness chain like a rocket, because people didn't realize, I'm not going to be able to buy a car I want next year because they can't get a computer chip from China. Holy cow. So I think this idea of linking the conceptual approach of SCORE to that of other conceptual frameworks for management is very valuable, because these other frameworks like quality management and risk management, they're all trying to figure out what to do about sustainability also. And supply chain management is absolutely critical. And they don't know about supply chain management, and they've never heard about SCORE. So I think that by bringing your knowledge forward to other organizations can really achieve a lot. And I think it could increase ASCM membership significantly, because you'll be showing other people in other professions that you've got a lot to offer.
Yeah, well, ASCM needs a little enlightenment around that kind of thinking, but you're absolutely right, Bert. And one of the things that you did say, it's really important, is that, is the power of cost accounting. So I started out in finance in aerospace, and cost accounting was a very applicable thing that we did, and it's critical to understanding anything, because you have to understand the flow of money, and if you can understand the flow of money, you can understand the flow of energy, you can understand the flow of water. They're all very related in terms of the logic that goes behind them. So you're absolutely right. And Preston, if you go to the next slide, we'll just touch on how some of these things do fit together. So keep back up one. There we go.
Good.
So to your point, Bert, one of the things that we had to solve at DuPont was we had started out with Six Sigma, and that was our big improvement tool. And everyone drank the Kool-Aid, and we were a big Six Sigma operation. Everybody was going to be a black belt and green belt, and we had a massive organization around it. And when we started coming in with supply chain work and improve the businesses, we kind of collided with the Six Sigma folks, because they were like, hey, we're the improvement people, not you guys. And they had begun to kind of recycle their savings. So they were losing a little bit of their luster, and we were coming around and making these more sustainable. So after kind of a few years of sort of battling it out for resources and corporate attention, we decided it was better to integrate these things. And so we eventually integrated everything from S&OP, or integrated business planning, to SCORE, to good supply chain practices, to Lean, to Six Sigma, into what became the DuPont production system. And I'm sure you've heard of the Toyota production systems. There's other production systems out there, and those are really where you take all of these things and you build it into your culture and your way of approaching creating value in your business, right? And they carry similar elements because the elements work together. So here's a little bit of the thinking that went into what we're doing, which was, we look at SCORE and said, it provides strategic alignment. It's not strategy, but it provides strategic alignment. It really brings together business and supply chain strategy. It ties together metrics and this outside in view of benchmarking. It gives you that best practice view. We had Lean, and Lean for us, we used operationally and across the organization to eliminate waste, improve processes, improve throughput. And then we had already been big practitioners around Six Sigma, which was very analytical. It gave us, a lot of structure on improvement and trying to get to the root cause of things without bias. It looked at data. It gave us really high standards of operational capability. When you get down to a Sigma level, that means very little can go wrong, and it's possible to achieve those things. It's about variance reduction. And then you start to look where these things intersect. You can see that, with Lean and SCORE, it gives you more of a focus on quality, and it's customer driven. It's value add versus non-value add. It focuses on people's knowledge and skills. If you look at SCORE and Six Sigma on the right, you learned about process decomposition, which is a very, very important part of how SCORE works. Roles and responsibilities are in there. That's the skills part of it related to process. And then operating specifications. SCORE helps you design how you do stuff, very much like Six Sigma. If you look at how they all come together, it gives you, process infrastructures, how it all works, process management. It becomes data driven, and it's very results and outcome focused. So, we realized that we could leverage all these things together, and we're not the only companies that did it, but, we really saw how these could all come together, and SCORE could bring things together, because that's one of its biggest values. It carries within it a lot of elements of other practices, but it brings an architecture and a methodology to bring things together and focus on the outcomes you're trying to achieve and how you move from the current state to the future state. So that's one of the biggest things SCORE could bring, and that's why I think in the next slide I'll show you it's very well suited to introducing, or reviving some of the concepts around sustainability, and particularly with energy and water and gases, as Preston has identified, and what you guys are doing. So if you go to the next slide. So on lean is all about waste reduction. So recycle and reuse are an excellent fit with the lean methodology and tool set. Six Sigma, is perfect because GHG performance and compliance require a fair amount of analysis. It is almost like a financial activity. You have to really trace all that stuff at various levels and bring it together and understand what you're doing. Energy and water intensity are also fairly require a fair amount of analysis to keep track of. And then at the business level, so business value, ESG, business ecosystems align very much with SCORE's ability to provide strategic alignment and bring together different strategies from different parts of the organization and across different functions. So, again, SCORE has this ability to bring things together, which is one of its core strengths, as well as the architecture that it provides. Any other questions or thoughts here? I'm pretty much at the end of what I was going to talk about. So hopefully this gave you guys a sense of how kind of all these things sort of can come together and how it can relate to an existing supply chain improvement methodology, which is SCORE, and how that can bring a lot of these elements together. So as you kind of go forward in this journey, SCORE can be a very valuable piece of how you do that. And in fact, SCORE itself, SCORE is inherently designed to take feedback, right? So, so the work you guys do here can be fed back into Apex's next initiative, where I think it's going to be SCORE 13. I'm not sure the timing, but it's probably coming up pretty soon. They're always looking for input and people to contribute that as well, and to keep building on that model, because that's how it was designed. And that's the kind of thing that will spread to other companies that already use SCORE, new companies that will be, accessing it for the first time will see it as a very robust model. So, it all kind of fit together. So any other questions before I finish?
Just a comment, fantastic presentation, really in a short period of time, delivered a lot of value, a lot of understanding.
Well, I as you know, Preston, I've been doing this for a very long time.
Right.
And it's near and dear to my heart. So I always try to bring it into any of the thinking I do. And as I was saying, is it doesn't have to be something, I learned with SCORE, when I introduced SCORE at DuPont, I remember distinctly, I'd gone to a SCORE class and you came away, as Preston said, for the water initiative with two really thick binders. And I remember showing it up at one of the business presidents and holding the binder up kind of like this, right? And I said, I have the answer to your problems. It was one of our more complicated businesses. It was a highly profitable coatings business, which is basically a paint business. And I said, hey, look, I got the solution to it. And the guy was like, no, thanks, and I learned from there that really the way you want to present it is say, hey, let's talk about your problems. And I have some things that might help us with that, and present it as an aid to whatever you're doing, not as the solution, right? That doesn't go over very well. So, it's in terms of using this, it's really to say it's an aid to all the other things you're trying to accomplish, not necessarily an end in itself.
Fantastic. Okay, I think we need to move on then to, again, Peter, here's his email address if you want to connect with him. But he's, Peter, by the way, is an advisor on our task force at the chapter on the Eco Sustainability Initiative. So we're very fortunate for him to help us. Anyway, the next thing I'd like to go over is and get input on from those joining this conversation, and soon it will be a conversation for at least 20-30 minutes, but this is the provisional schedule. It's kind of mud on the wall. It's really to break the ice, and it will be refined based on input. And if we don't get input, then we will use that golden rule, silence is endorsement. But let me just run through this real quick. And most of it will be virtual. And most of the sessions will be virtual on a monthly basis. And the reason for virtual, although it is not as comfortable and warm as an in-person learning experience, it is, in fact, has a smaller carbon footprint. Okay, that's one argument for it. Plus, it's more practical because the cost of doing it is very minimal. And in fact, for the most part, we have not made a decision about charging for anything that doesn't cost us anything, meaning we're not using it as a revenue source unless it becomes necessary. So almost all these things that are virtual, except for one session so far that is planned, it's on SCORE. It's actually planned to be something it takes a person who really wants to go that far into getting a SCORE P certification preparation. But let me just run through this. First of all, the next session that would be up would be either in March or April. We have one other possibility, but it will be eco-sustainability related. It would just push everything down a little bit, or we'd run it in parallel. So it's an overview webinar of about an hour. But after Peter's presentation, I'm not sure that anyone would need anything more, but we're going to do an hour, a full hour on that, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. And then we're going to have a multi-session that would be 2 hours in length. It builds on that. And it really is sequenced so that within 2 or 3 weeks after this occurs, that a full workshop takes place. And it will span about a month or so of education, 26, 28 hours or whatever. Then we want to have a GHG protocol presentation that is about covering scope 1 and 2. Scope 1 is the real one that needs to be gone over. It's a bit dry, but we'll hope to get some implementation stuff about it because they draw the distinction between accounting and then the plans to go reduce the emissions. And that will be an overview. And 2 really is energy source. But so far, we're viewing this as a 1 hour, 15-minute overview. Then scope 3, and just the supply chain piece of that, because that's really what's in need of the most attention at the moment. Although we do get into the circular economy later on in the program. Maybe it should be pushed up, but that's based on input. And as you can see, we then go down to the water footprint network overview, UN Global Compact, CDP overview webinar. So we're talking about the places where people cluster around and they think of them as providing leadership. And then we'll go over an eco-sustainability procurement, finance, the reporting that is required now and will become even required more in the future, and financial reporting at the corporate level. We have some plant tour possibilities that we're thinking about. Oceanside has put in a pure water plant. They're going to provide something like 20, 30,000 gallons of water or more. I've forgotten the number out of wastewater. Carlsbad has a RO water plant. And problem with RO is energy intensive. And that's interesting because when we talk about carbon reduction and we talk about water use reduction, often they're in conflict. So it takes a very sharp-minded team of people to find that sweet spot where you get a benefit between both of them. And actually, there's a possible addition. These are possibilities. One addition would be and out there in the what's the name of the lake that's dying, the sea, Salton Sea. There's actually a steam generated from the Earth power plant, and what they're doing now is they're piloting extraction lithium from it, and so they're getting lithium with no of the environmental damage, and they're actually getting power to generate electricity. So that might be interesting, but some of these aren't really tours that you take seriously until you go visit, because it's got to show well, and the people that would attend have to be really dedicated, because some of these things just don't show well. They're not like assembling a car or whatever. And then Kaizen, and we'll have a break. I'll come back with a LED overview, a webinar, circular economy overview, and engineering products for the circular economy overview. But in fact, we can change out any of this, swap out any of this based on input from people. And we get individuals now, like Peter involved, we'll get really a lot of guidance. And Peter has been really a terrific source of knowledge. Now, any of that can change. And one of the rules that we've kind of accepted is that if there's demand for something, that we would go to the next level. And the next level would be things like multi-session events that hopefully still virtual, but may take place in person for GHG protocol. We get deep into the woods. Now they have their own workshops. They're great, but maybe we could utilize that and do facilitation and have study groups around their canned courseware. That's a possibility. Water footprint methodology, multi-session possibility. You'll do demonstrations, NGO overviews. The whole eco-sustainability community has grown so large, and there's so many interconnections and collaborations that you really have to paint a picture to extract full benefit, so that you're fully armed to get the job done and then with a minimal amount of effort, with the maximum amount of impact. Future energy portfolio. I thought of that as a great possible content thing that we would want to know about, because we're not going to go green totally. So we're going to have to compromise about the portfolio that a company has to come up with, the recipe of energy mixes and things like that. And I know UCSD has a great Coursera course on this, but maybe just an overview to spike interest. Environmental law is a possibility. These are all possibilities, not anything structured in, but there's just kind of get people's appetite whetted. Microgrids, which you would need for that portfolio. Talking to officials that are in charge of making decisions at the city level. We try to avoid the civic side, but in fact, what occurs within a city boundary or a county boundary, politicians make decisions. So we want to make sure that we get them to talk about their positions and their lack of or current knowledge. And hopefully, if we know who they are, then we can influence them. Executive panel discussions, again, working from the top down instead of pushing from the bottom up. But a lot of things are happening top down thanks to the Global 500. And again, the carbon disclosure projects and their clients, which are institutional investors controlling 1.3 or $4 trillion worth of investment money. And who knows? I mean, there's no reason why we couldn't run 2 webinars a month in concurrent sessions. It's just a matter of workload on the team. And so that's why I'm trying to expand the team. Okay, that's will be discussed in our work breakout, which really we don't have much time left. So if we perhaps could dedicate maybe 20 or 30 minutes to that, people could still hang in there. I apologize, it's taken a little longer than expected, but I think the content is worth the investment in time. The content's been excellent, thanks to Peter's contribution. But here's the time where we want to do a breakout. And I don't know how many people we have that are willing to join the breakout groups, or hopefully they will. But there's where we want to get some status from you about what you're doing, what your company's doing, what you personally need, contacts you can provide, and do you really want to join the team? And I think those are our objectives on our part, but we want to know what your objectives are from this whole program that we're planning and then we will actually execute this year into 2023. So please join us now. Amanda, can you set up and push us all into breakout?
Yeah, we've got two rooms of 4 people in each, or 3 people in one now. Okay, so I'll start them up. Yeah.
Okay, sounds great.